Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my epic rant on the wretched wrestling movie that is No Holds Barred. Now, before I go any further and leg drop this movie to the center of the fucking earth, I would like to give a special shout out to Brock for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, No Holds Barred was intended to be the film that put WWF on the map when it comes to being a serious player in the film industry, as well as being the launch pad for Hulk Hogan as a big movie star. And it did neither of those things. It didn't really make WWF a serious player in the film industry, even though they would try again years later to similar results. And it definitely didn't make Hulk Hogan a big movie star. He tried to continue this charade of being a movie star after No Holds Barred with films like Suburban Commando and Mr. Nanny, but those films didn't do that well either in the box office. So Hulk Hogan was just never really meant to be a movie star. And after seeing this film, you could definitely see why. He's a bad actor. And despite all the charisma that he shows in his promos and he shows in the ring, none of that translates on film when it comes to his acting. It's a pretty big, major part of being a movie star, is you got to have charisma and you got to be a semi-decent actor. Hulk Hogan isn't even what I would call a semi-decent actor, and his charisma didn't translate. Critics at the time actually put it best. One of the critics who reviewed this movie and gave it a well-deserved negative review said that Hulk Hogan's presence on screen is that of a cuddly teddy bear that just explodes in violence and anger every 10 minutes or so. And I was like, that honestly is a great way to put it, because for some reason Hulk Hogan just comes across as a guy who's too nice, and then out of nowhere he'll just be angry and ferocious and start spitting and snarling, and none of that really feels that authentic either. The film is directed by a TV veteran and Thomas J. Wright, who directed some good episodes of some legitimately solid TV shows. He directed an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone revival called The Toys of Caliban from the second season, which I really enjoy. Thought that was definitely one of the better episodes of that season. He would go on to direct episodes of Millennium, Firefly, The X-Files. He directed episodes of the Max Headroom Show prior to doing this movie. He started off directing a low-budget indie drama called Torchlight in 1985. And the experience that he has as a director is definitely on display here when it comes to the montages involving Zeus fighting other combatants, and also in some of the wrestling sequences. But it also showcases a lot of his weaknesses as a director, because he overuses slow-mo to the point where it's honestly quite ridiculous. There are other moments where he just can't get the right timing, so he doesn't know how to shoot comedy in a way where it actually has the right amount of comedic timing or energy. It's very flat and just doesn't. It lacks a lot of dynamic, which is what you need when it comes to like something that's trying to be silly or over the top. If you can't find the right dynamic or the right balance, then those sequences just come across as cartoonish and not in a good way. And he did some second unit direction for other movies, including Howard the Duck, which that film is not what I would call a great movie, but it's a masterpiece compared to No Holds Barred. Like I will easily watch Howard the Duck any day of the week over No Holds Barred. That's just me personally. Um, but yeah, the direction, it's not what I would call something that's gonna win any awards. It's not particularly strong, but it's there. It really is there. Like, it's not. I'm not going to sit here and say the direction is like one of the weakest aspects of the movie, because honestly, there are much weaker aspects when it comes to No Holds Barred than the direction. The direction is serviceable. It's decent enough for what it is. I think a better director could have injected more energy, more life, more excitement into some of these scenes, especially some of the action sequences, and the fighting scenes. But as it is, it's fine. The screenplay, though, by Dennis Hacken, which that name is hilarious to me, because this screenplay is without a doubt the work of a fucking hack, and it's so fitting that the guy's last name is Hacken. Like, oh my god! Like, even the script is at its core also pretty hackened. If you're familiar with that term, it's insane how well this guy's last name fits when it comes to how pathetic this script is. Apparently, Vince and Hulk had a say in some of the things, and they did some rewrites. Apparently, I remember reading. I guess this was a project that was in development for actually a pretty long time, from what I was reading, like at least a couple years prior to it eventually getting made and released. And it went through like different versions of the script. It's unbelievable to me, though, that they settled for this script. This script sucks. It's a WWF movie, but Hulk Hogan doesn't even play his larger-than-life Hulk Hogan persona from the WWF. And I'm going to keep calling it WWF because at the time it was WWF. It wasn't WWE. I'm not doing that shit. It was WWF. And yeah, WWF was still pretty popular at the time. I don't know why this wasn't just a WWF movie. I think it was a huge missed opportunity by Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan to try to make this into something that's not a WWF film. But then it also tries to be a WWF movie because of the fact that you have Hulk Hogan as a star. So, and it even calls the federation that he's wrestling for the World Wrestling Federation. So, they still call it the WWF, but you don't have WWF wrestlers. Hulk Hogan plays some guy named Rip, and his name is Rip Thomas. It might as well be Rip Taylor and throwing confetti in the air because it's just as effective. Wearing baby blue, which just looks off and just does not strike any kind of intimidation or fear into anyone. Although he has another outfit later on where it's like red and black, but then it just makes me think of Vader, and I'm like, why isn't Vader here? Like, I'd rather see Vader in this movie as one of the bad guys. But yeah, baby blue, I don't know what the fuck they thought when it comes to that design. And he has this catchphrase like "rip 'em" or whatever, the "rip 'em." Like, rip 'em? Like, rip a fart? Like, rip them. And there's not much wrestling in this wrestling movie, which is another problem. It's just a one problem out of many when it comes to this film's story and this film's screenplay. It's a wrestling movie, which has like a wrestling match in the opening of the film, where Rip, played by Hulk Hogan, wrestles one of the members of Demolition without his makeup. And then there's a few scenes at some point when Rip fights some guys who were employed by Brill, who's the evil, corrupt TV executive who's mad at the success that this other network has with the WWF, and he wants a piece of that pie. So he tries to sign Rip away from WWF, but Rip refuses, so then he sends his goons after him. That's where you have the infamous scene where Rip grabs a guy and he's lifting him in the air, and he's like, "What's that smell? Dookie! Dookie! Dookie!" You're just like, what the Why did Dennis Hacken think that was a prime and absolutely great idea? Why did he think that was a good idea? To have a guy shit his pants and then have the lead supposed badass wrestling hero of the movie sniff his shitty pants and then act like a complete utter moron? I don't get it. And then on top of that, I mean, it gets worse because for some reason the humor in this is just so pathetic and bad. It's not just that Dookie scene. There's other sequences, like when Rip has a guy on a motorcycle and he's like, "You, me, and a tree." Like, you, me, and a tree? That's your one-liner? You, me, and a tree? And then he continually tries to shove this catchphrase down your throat, which is jockass. Because Brill will constantly call Rip a jockass. And this is a word that's said at least 5 times or more throughout the entire movie. And I'm at a loss for words as to why Dennis Hacken thought that was something that was going to catch on. It's not funny. It just sounds like some kind of fake swear word that the censors would put in for a TV version of an unrated, like R-rated film. Jockass? What? So, yeah, you have jockass, you, me, and a tree, Dookie. You got this other scene of involving Rip and the love interest, where the dialogue is cringe between the two, where it's supposed to be cute, but it just comes across as cringe-inducing. Then you have a whole sequence where Rip gets involved in a pie fight. If I want to see a pie fight in a bad movie, I'll just watch Howard the Duck again. Why? A pie fight? This movie is called No Holds Barred. And there's a scene where Hulk Hogan takes out a bunch of guys in a diner with pies. This is pathetic. And speaking of pathetic, the finale, the final battle between Rip and Zeus is really weak and lame. Most of it is just them fighting outside the ring. There's not really a lot of creativity there. And it's not really a whole lot of no holds barred stuff either. Like, they get in a bit of a brawl outside the ring. Zeus tries to use some parts of the ring to his advantage and tries to cheat a little bit, and Rip stops him. I guess he ultimately does take him out and sends him flying down into the canvas so hard that he collapses the whole ring, which admittedly was kind of a cool shot. But like prior to that, the fight was nothing. I think it's due to the fact that Tiny Lister is very stiff and is not a good wrestler or a very good fighter. And Hulk Hogan also has his own limitations in the ring. So you got Hulk Hogan going up against a non wrestler, and so you're not really able to cover up Hulk's limitations. So you just bring more of his limitations to the surface, and really the best brawls were the ones involving Zeus fighting other people. It wasn't the brawl between Zeus and Rip that the whole film was building up to. And that wasn't even a wrestling match either. Because I'm going to bring it up again. It's a wrestling movie, and there's barely any fucking wrestling in it. It's like the same thing as that Street Fighter movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. It's called Street Fighter, but they don't fight in the street. And it's not a tournament fighting movie. So, with this, yeah, you have that one wrestling scene at the start of the film where Hulk Hogan fights one of the members of Demolition, sans makeup, and then you have that final confrontation between Zeus and Rip at the end of the movie. But even that is mostly just them brawling outside the ring. So where the fuck is the wrestling in the WWF movie? I don't get why Vince thought it was such a great idea to try to take his property and just take away the elements that made it so popular and made it so much fun to watch. Why was this not a WWF film with other wrestlers like Jake the Snake Roberts, Bret Hart, Roddy Piper? Speaking of Roddy Piper, that kind of explains why the film was structured more like a traditional sort of action movie, because it's Vince's fuck you to Roddy Piper, because, you know, Vince is a petty bastard sometimes. Well, not sometimes, most of the time. And he was jealous of Roddy Piper's film success outside of WWF, so he tried to recreate the same thing with Hulk Hogan and with a different action movie, and the result was a fucking disaster, and it was embarrassing. You should have just stuck to your wheelhouse and made a WWF movie. There's a lot of fun you could have with a WWF movie. There's a lot of larger-than-life cinematic characters in the WWF at the time. But for some reason, Vince didn't decide to go that route and decided to make a lame action movie that wasn't exciting, wasn't thrilling, and then also injected a lot of just crude humor that I think was only there to make the 6-year-olds in the audience snicker. You know, the stuff about Dookie, the bar that Brill goes to when he comes up with the idea for his Tough Man competition, and it's just like covered in what looks like piss and dirt and shit, and the waitress is snorting and just gagging almost. Like she's got really bad allergies, so she's constantly like snuffling and clearing her throat, go to the bathroom, and it's a disgusting wasteland. Everyone looks like they smell like just absolute shit. And that just carries over when it comes to a lot of the humor. It's just so crude to the point where it's just gross and not at all funny. And yeah, a wrestling movie where there's barely any fucking wrestling in it. There's more instances of Brill saying jock ass than there is wrestling. And the thing is, it's no holds barred, and there is a bit of an edge to it, which is a little edgier than some of the stuff that you saw in WWF at the time. I mean, Brill gets electrocuted at the end of the movie, and Zeus in some of the fights, he's really taking it to some people. But then you have stuff where it's clearly way too tame. A guy gets electrocuted to death, but then you have a pie fight. You know, it's just, the tone is all over the place. There's nothing remotely consistent about this script except for the fact that it sucks. It's a really bad screenplay. There's this stuff involving Rip's son or brother or whoever, and he gets attacked by Zeus, and you're supposed to feel bad or whatever, but the character was nothing. He might as well just been a Rip t-shirt without anybody in it, because it had the same amount of personality. And the whole stuff about the guy who's the head of the struggling network, WTN, Brill, it's like, I really don't care about his plight. And honestly, the stuff that he does just seems rather insane for a TV executive. Like, how did he get away with all this shit? Yeah, he's a TV executive, but it's insinuated that he's the executive of like the lowest rated network out there. If he's the executive of the lowest rated network, how does he have all this power and influence, and how does he have all this money to hire these henchmen and do all these things if he's the exec of the lowest rated network? And he's acting like a crooked wrestling promoter. So that's why you should have just had it be a wrestling movie. It's not rocket science. Why did you have to overcomplicate things? So yeah, I know I spoke about the script for like a absurd amount of time, but that's really where most of the problems lie with this movie. Another problem though is definitely the cast. I mean, Hulk Hogan, I'm a fan of Hulk. I'm not a fan of a lot of his recent actions or his beliefs, but I'm a fan of him in the ring. I've always been a fan of his WWF work. And like I said earlier in this video, none of the same charisma, none of the same personality shows up when it comes to his performance in this movie. And even the stuff in the ring, like, he just comes across as like a excitable bulldog. You know, he's a huff, 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 and there's a lot of like snarling and growling in this, and it's silly. It's so silly seeing the scene between Zeus and Rip, where you have Rip going, and then you got Zeus going, ah. They're just like, what is this shit? This is fucking lame. So you got Hulk Hogan as Rip Thomas and his lame baby blues. You've got Joan Severance, who's hot as hell, but admittedly was never the best actress. But at the same time, I can't blame her for what she's given to work with here, which is jack fucking shit. And the scenes between her and Hulk Hogan are terrible. They have no romantic chemistry to speak of. Kurt Fuller is Tom Brell, like he's the evil executive. I kept calling him Brill, but I could have sworn they called him Brill. Well, you know, Brell, who gives a fuck? The performance is so hammy and so over the top that it's incredibly hard to take it seriously. Like, it's not even one of those performances where it's like enjoyably bad. It's just bad. You honestly kind of feel for Kurt Fuller because you're like, man, this is easily the most embarrassing performance of his career. The same year he was in Ghostbusters 2 and he played the mayor's aide, and he did a good job playing a sniveling, cowardly jerk off character. But that character was more restrained. He wasn't going around screaming jock ass and just being obnoxious to the point where it wasn't entertaining. He was annoying. I didn't like his performance at all. Tiny Lister as Zeus, he's got the physical presence, but the look that they gave him was ludicrous. He's got a giant Z in the on the side of his head. He's got a fucking unibrow. He can't barely speak, so he just sounds like he's unintelligent. He just speaks in the third person and says very few lines. Zeus. I'm sorry, you got a fucking unibrow. And then Tiny Lister, he has that issue with his eye. So he's got this fucking goofy looking eyes, a unibrow, and this fucking stupid Z on the side of his head. And then, like, when he's supposed to have, like, a outfit that he's gonna wear to the ring, and this like looks like fucking shoulder pads made out of like tin foil or some shit. It looks fucking silly. It looks stupid. It laughable. It reminded me of the crappy armor that Jesse Ventura's character was forced to wear in The Running Man. That looked like it was made out of cheap plastic that was just painted chrome. So yeah, Tiny Lister is Zeus. I mean, I'm not going to be too harsh on Tiny Lister because they gave him nothing to work with. They just were like, hey, act like a giant goober and flex your muscles and scream. Mark Pellegrino, he played Randy, the brother of Rip. He was pretty awful. The rest of the cast, you have like Bill Henderson, Charles Levin, David Paymer. You also have Gene Okerlund, who plays himself, Jesse Ventura, who plays himself, Howard Finkel, who plays himself. So you had a few WWF alumni who were also involved in the film. But Stan Hansen, he was in this. He played Neanderthal. Jeep Swenson played Lugwrench. Jeep Swenson was actually the guy who played Bane in Batman and Robin. And you know what? Even that movie is better than No Holds Barred. Because this film is that fucking bad. At least to me. The cinematography by Frank Besochia, pretty weak, pretty substandards. The editing by Tom Pryor was alright, I guess, at times. Not the best, though, when it comes to the wrestling scenes. The music by Jim Johnston. I know Jim Johnston, I think it's the same guy who actually worked with WWF. Nothing about the score was memorable. I think it was a missed opportunity not bringing on board somebody like Vince DiCola. I think that would have been really cool. And the original songs on the soundtrack are nothing. Like an 80s movie, and like you don't even have a single memorable song in the entire soundtrack. Like they could have, I honestly went after Alice Cooper. He was a fan of wrestling ever since he was involved in WrestleMania 3. He did songs for Iron Eagle 2. So don't tell me that Vince couldn't afford Alice Cooper. But yeah, just an awful movie. It's a wretched wrestling film. It's a stinking pile of dookie and jock ass. That's 93 minutes, but it feels like 193 because there's no reason to care about what is happening. You don't give a shit about the romance between Rip and Joan Severance's character, Samantha. You don't care about the whole stuff with the competing network. You don't give a shit about whether or not Rip is even gonna beat Zeus in the bout at the end of the movie, because it doesn't seem like the stakes are really. I guess the stakes are high because if he loses, he's stuck with the evil executive. But it's one of those things where I lost interest and lost my will to give a fuck long before that point. So none of that extra stakes actually feels like it has any weight. And then when you have the match itself, it's so middling, it's so mediocre that that isn't even worth the weight either. So there's not much of a payoff. So yeah, just a really bad movie and a bad match too, because Vince decided to make Zeus an actual wrestler in the WWF and had this pay-per-view called No Holds Barred, the match, the movie, where you had this really just lame, forgettable steel cage match between Hulk Hogan, Brutus Beefcake, and Macho Man and Zeus. And there was a few other matches as well, but it's just one of those things where it was just a bad match and a bad movie. Like if you paid for that pay-per-view, you got twice the shit. You got a shitty match and then you got a shitty movie. But anyway, I got nothing else to say about No Holds Barred except thanks for watching my rant, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.